caregivers and what they are experiencing and some of the issues that they go through. And we want to talk about how to help them get through this process, especially for those who are at home. Many of you work with different communities, assisted living communities, or you work within the senior resource realm as far as hospitals, at home, home care. I know a lot of you in here. Insight, for instance, work specifically with memory care. And so today we want to have that conversation to help caregivers. And hopefully you'll take this conversation back and talk to other members. So first I want to introduce Lisa Harlem. Please tell me a little bit about yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone. So as you mentioned, I'm Lolita Harlem, the Executive Director of the Dementia Caregiver Support Program. And so our whole philosophy is about empowering the caregiver, because with an empowered caregiver, you have a better situation for your loved one with dementia. Mm-hmm. And what we found is that there's so much misinformation around dementia, what it is, and our caregivers are burnt out. And so our goal is to just provide those resources, support, education, community, and to the best of our ability, kind of create a one-stop shop, because there's tons of information and resources just here in this area. But most caregivers trying to find and piece it all together is just another layer of frustration. So that's where our nonprofit organization comes in to really help bridge that gap.
So can you tell us, what are some of the typical things that caregivers normally go through, especially those who are at home dealing with their parents or grandparents?
So the number one thing is burnout. And we have a virtual support group of almost 4,000 now. And they're from all over. And I can tell you, the challenge is pretty much the same. They're tired, they're frustrated, they're trying to get help from other family members. There's usually one or two that are kind of the primary person taking care of everything, but trying to just get that support. And then there's also guilt, because often they feel that either they should be doing more, or they're pulling from other places, like maybe, they're a mom and they can't really donate or dedicate time to their children because they're taking care of their loved one with dementia. So those are some of just the top challenges that we see.
And what you also see is this thing called the sandwich generation, where then the adult children are either working, taking care of their families and their loved ones, going to work, come back home, and then they have to start over working with their parents, setting up appointments for doctors, taking them on different trips, things of that nature, keeping them coming. I have a friend personally who literally, she gets up in the morning to work for a government agency I can't name, and she comes home after working 8-9 hours, driving in traffic, gets back home, and when she sits down on the couch, her mom wants to have a conversation with her. And she's like, Greta, I'm so tired. I really want to just have that moment of just getting myself together, but then I feel guilty if I don't talk to her because she's been home all day. So I talked to her, giving her recommendations as to finding a senior center for her to go to. Have her have some things to do besides sitting home waiting for you, just cooking dinner, which I love. I have no problem with my mom being there cooking dinner for me when I come home, but doing it every day, after a while, it just becomes mundane. And the number one thing we need to do is not let seniors stay steady. They need to be active, they need to socialize. That slows down, does not get rid of it, it slows down the progress of dementia.
And if I could just add two really big things have happened that have really just increased the challenge. One, our baby boomers. So the baby boomer generation is the longest living generation right now, and it's the largest. And so as our wonderful, beautiful baby boomers age, then of course the challenges may come in, just in general, not even including dementia-related illnesses. So you have that factor. And then the pandemic, as I'm sure our medical folks know, it literally caused every demographic generation to go backwards. And so when you think about, you have our seniors getting older, they're not active, they were not able to communicate with others, so now you have the cognitive impairment. But then you also have, as Retta was mentioning, let's say if you're a busy mom or taking care of your family, what we're seeing is even younger older generations now went backwards. And so now you have someone, as you mentioned, that kind of sandwiched in between, trying to take care of a senior who it may seem like almost instantly started to decline. And you may have younger ones that you're also trying to keep active and work with, the disadvantages that came out of the pandemic. So it really has been a struggle with trying to find that balance of taking care of yourself, your loved one, and whatever generations are coming behind.
And can you hit on that portion about sundown? What is that? Because that affects a lot of caregivers.
Yeah. So I love that, and again, I don't pretend to be a medical professional, but sundowning is something you'll hear very common in the dementia world. And basically, the way I like to explain it is, how as it gets later, our body tells us that we're tired. Our body just does certain things. Our brain lets us know that we're getting to the end of the day and that we're tired. So for our loved ones that have dementia, they go through what is termed sundowning. And what happens is, usually as the day starts to end and it gets darker, sundowning, we notice that their cognitive decline starts to really become enormous. And so that's where you, a lot of times, will start seeing things like more hallucinations. You'll start seeing just behavior that doesn't match. And I can say personally, as my mother has dementia, and I can say it is almost in an instant. It's quite amazing to actually observe. But she will be fine talking, everything is great, and then within just a few minutes, she will be completely displaced. And she's like, I need to get out of here, I need to go home. So it's a very real thing. And I love that you bring that up, because so many times caregivers, they don't believe it's true. They think that the loved one is just acting out, or like they try to convince them that, it's not that big a deal, but it really is a serious thing. So I think it's important for you to recognize it's not intentional, but it really is something chemically happening that can exacerbate the symptoms of dementia.
One of my friends at church, we're in the senior ministry, and she approached me and she said, Ms. Renner, can you go to my apartment complex and talk to management, because there's a lady, my neighbor, who usually around 6 or 7 o'clock at night, she starts wandering the hallways in the apartment complex, and she can't remember how to get back to her apartment. And she said, I told them a number of times that they need to go up there, help her, and figure something out, because I'm really concerned she's gonna hurt herself and walk out in the street and get lost. And so I told her, I do what I can, but they need to know about adult protective services. I asked her, does she have family members? They live far away. And a lot of times the children, like you said, are in denial. They'll let mom and dad live in the apartment, and they're like, oh, mom can take care of herself, until they literally, it's extreme, where one of my clients said that when she drove up to meet her mom for lunch, her clothes were dirty, her hair was a mess. She goes, that is not my mom. And I've known her for all my life, and I'm pulling up and I don't recognize this lady. And she said, that's when I knew I needed to find a community for her. And we don't want to get to that point. We want them to start looking at support groups. And we said they have over 4,000 online. So even if they don't have time, they're busy at work, there are support groups. Many of the communities, this is another good thing too, many of the assisted living communities that have memory care offer support groups to the family members for free. And they invite outside guests as well to come in. It is so needed. If you look at the statistics of the number of seniors, by 2030 we will have over 24% of our population made up of seniors, and that equates to between 70 to 88 million seniors by 2030. This senior tsunami, or the silver tsunami, they claim is coming, it's here. And we're not addressing it. And we're going to have people who have money and still can't get in communities because we don't have enough communities to help them. And memory care costs much more than assisted living or independent living. It's 24-hour care, secure community. Commonwealth knows very well. They have an excellent program with the video, VDI.
It's VDT, it's virtual dementia tour experience.
I had the experience of participating with their VTI, and very scary and they tell me this is what seniors are going through, this is some of the things they experience. You feel like nails in your feet, you can barely see. There's so much happening that you really can hear or concentrate on what the person's saying to you and following directions. And I tell you, everyone, if you haven't had the opportunity, please make an appointment and go experience it. I'm not sure how long it's going to happen, but it's a great way to learn and to have much more compassion and empathy as to what these family members are going through as caregivers.
Yeah, and I'll just add, most families, when they have a loved one, first that's just aging, but especially when you add in the component of dementia, most of them are going to prefer to try to keep them home. And so that's one of the things that our program really, again, provides the information and support. How can you manage this at home? What are the resources available out there? What education do you need? Again, as we talked about, sometimes it's just understanding. Again, I'll use my mom as an example. In the beginning stages, I would try to, diffuse everything. So when she would say, I'm not at home, I need to get home, I would spend hours trying to convince her she was at home. So, you learn how to navigate that. So for example, now what I do when she calls, when my dad actually helps her call, and she's like, hey, get me out of here, I'm not home. And I'll say, well, do you want me to drive this late? Are you worried something might happen if I'm on the road this late? And she's like, well, no, I don't want you driving. And I said, well, do you feel okay to stay there just tonight? And then tomorrow, we'll make sure that you get where you need to get. That's all she needs. Okay, yeah, great, that's fine. And then she's fine, because the next day she doesn't even remember. Oh, we have a question?
No, whenever you're done, no rush.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I have me too.
Yeah, you can go. I think he had his hand up first, and then
I'm sorry, I
You got it,
said
you got it.
Yeah, just quick question. Besides like using in regards to the Alzheimer's and dementia and stuff, besides like using gold nano like particles to like reduce the inflammation and astrocytes and stuff, is there anything else like advances in medical and like that you know of in the medical world that's like curving or like fixing this that we may not know like in the general public with something behind the scenes?
I love that question because there is a lot of information and research now that shows, much like pre-diabetes, many people are familiar with that, and years ago that wasn't even a thing,
Yeah.
right? So much like that, what they have found, if you catch it in the beginning, now there's no cure right now for dementia, but if you catch it in the beginning when they have what's called mild cognitive impairment, it's usually the first diagnosis, and you go into an aggressive, keeping them active, doing brain health exercise, there's a lot of data now that shows that you can delay symptoms for up to 8 to 10 years. So that is right, that is amazing. So there's a lot of data out there. A lot of now, I'm actually working with Fairfax Family Practice Medical, so that we're getting in and trying to get right in those beginnings when you first start noticing, and that loved one, you take them for their physical, almost every single time they get that mild cognitive impairment. And most people walk away like, oh, no big deal, great, they're fine. You want to become aggressive at that point. Get that brain moving. The data shows that is delaying symptoms. Imagine your loved one, they may have a diagnosis, but now they're living healthy for years because you're doing those things.
So I should keep playing video games, right?
I want to add also to this, there has been a write-up on new technology, new medication. I can't speak on behalf of both the hospitals here if they have specific departments that address this as well, but I do know there is a community, many of the assisted living communities in here specialize, many of them have memory care, and they do work with PT, physical therapists, occupational therapists, things like that. But one of the most advanced communities, I would say, is Silverado. They do a lot of the new stuff, but it's not cheap, okay? So clear. Insight is another awesome place that you can go to. They have advanced technology. They specifically work with memory care.
Okay.
And so you take a tour. They have a lot of tours, right, that they offer, with the community to educate families, and I'm not sure, do you have a support team, support group?
Right, well, I'm actually formerly with Insight Heavens, actually, but it's a great organization, it's a nonprofit, located in Fairfax. They have day center there that people get dropped off every day. They can do all the ADLs, they can help them with stuff if they need to. And then they have a reconnections program, which is for people with mild cognitive impairment. And that's basically just sharpening the brain. A lot of it's socialization. A lot of folks, they socialize less once they get a diagnosis. They hang around with their family friends, I mean less, just friend groups, social groups, churches. It's important that they have some sort of socialization, and I mean, everything you're saying is spot on, you know.
I had a question, so.
I did, well, you answered it kind of, it was more of the, so stimulating memory games are good, right?
Yes.
So you answered that, so isn't it technically, with diabetes type 3?
Again, so I have to think about how much I can say. It is now public information that the NIA has presented documented research that shows that it is very similar to diabetes in that, yes, yes. And so that is, you know, we're very careful with just saying that because it's still being reviewed, but
Sure.
there is official research that
Yeah.
shows it is the same type of inflammation that happens when it comes to dementia. So the things that work for diabetes
Yeah.
are, as far as, you know, avoiding diabetes and managing it, is exactly the same things we encourage when it comes to dementia.
And activity, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier about sundowning and how they change kind of at the drop of a dime, but with the hallucinations. I know a lot of times with people who suffer from dementia, they also suffer from like major attitudes, or they get angry, they get frustrated really quickly. Are there any things that we can do to kind of bring them back down or calm them back down? Because it goes really far. It can get really dangerous.
I love that question, and thank you for bringing that out, because my biggest thing I want everyone, if you don't take away anything else, it is have empathy. And if you think about, imagine yourself today. Imagine if everything that you're used to doing is now disoriented. You have to ask someone for every single thing. You're confused. You don't recognize yourself anymore. Many people living with dementia, they look in the mirror and they're like, who is this old person? So when you think of that if you let that guide you in how you deal with your loved one, that is really my answer, because you're not going to necessarily change what they're going through. It's coming from the lack of control. It's coming from confusion. We don't think about how much brain effort it takes just to sometimes just get up. But if a person is now having blocks mentally, just the simple act of getting up and moving now is a chore. And then as you learn about dementia, as it goes through the different stages, it actually impacts vision. So imagine if you only can see, they say it starts maybe this, your vision shrinks to this, to even binocular size. So imagine if you don't see on the side and all of a sudden someone is right here in your face. How would you react? You'd be afraid. If your instinct is to kind of get aggressive, you might fight back, right? So learning those things, what we always encourage, even when I've gone to nursing homes or assisted living homes, is to learn how to be empathetic when you're dealing with them. So for example, when you speak to them, directly talking to them like I'm doing now, right? You may even need to get lower so that your eye level. Try not to just come from the side, because again, imagine how you would feel. You might swing on somebody, right? So that is a great answer. Again, think about and it can be frustrating because you forget that they can't help it. But if you can remember that, make changes within your approach, make things easier for them, and that can kind of help a little bit of that aggressive behavior that we see.
And for caregivers, some recommendations to help take some of the stress off of you. We would recommend that you may look at respite. Many of the assisted living communities offer respite. Some require 30 days. Some can do less than that, so work with them. Reach out to day centers, look at adult day centers. They offer eight hours a day. Some counties offer day centers as well, adult day centers. Also, talk to your family members. Have that real conversation with them. I know some of you people are like, she is not gonna help me, but you never know. Talk about shifts, taking turns. Those are, that takes a lot of stress off you as well. My client I just saw today, her mom spent Christmas in New York with her sisters, so she could get a break. And she said, I need it. I need it. And so that saved money, and because she was around family, she knew her cousins she had grown up with. And her mom is the oldest of the siblings that are in the Bronx, actually. I'm from New York. So. And then also, we said assign smaller tasks.
Yeah, if I could add on that, I love that. So one of the biggest issues is I can't get my family and friends to help. And sometimes there's a lot of different reasons for that. But what I always encourage, and it seems to help a bit, give a person a specific task. Because people will say, well, what can I do to help? I'm so sorry you're going through this. If you say, hey, can you pick up groceries at 5 o'clock for dinner tonight, right? That's specific. If you say, hey, can you come over and sit with my loved one for 2 hours, right? If you just say, I need help. Again, in our support group, many, many times they're frustrated. No one is helping me. But don't assume people don't want to help. Sometimes they just don't really know, what do I do? Exactly. So think about the smallest things that would help you. Maybe in a family, like in our family, my sister is very good with numbers, finances. So she handles that piece. I handle the doctor's appointments and, like I said, sitting with my mom and all of that. But think about that. Think about your family, your neighbors, friends. Maybe they have one little thing that they're good at, and it wouldn't be a lot for them to offer that one particular thing.
We had a couple questions here. That's okay? All right. So now Ms. Phillips, not tell there's a hand that came that way.
This one, yes, sir.
Yeah, I took care of my mom. She's still around. She's 91. She's in a nursing home. And one of the things that was told to me, and this might be really helpful for caregivers, is it true that with an elderly person who's beginning to have dementia goes through surgery, which after a certain age, a lot of times there's like joint surgeries, things like that that happen, that the anesthesia actually propels the dementia, and sometimes it dissipates and sometimes it doesn't.
Oh my goodness, yes, I love that question. It is true. And again, I'll share, with my mom, she had a mass that we found. And they weren't quite sure, they're pretty sure it's not a cancerous mass, but they weren't quite sure any other time they would surgically remove it in biopsy. But the surgeon, their whole board got involved because with her having dementia, he said, it's very, very common. The anesthesia can set them back. Sometimes they come out full blown, unaware, but then also even recovery, where we might think, I have this area, I better not touch it. They don't have that cognitive piece. So maybe they're just scratching it because they're just not cognitively thinking about what it is. They don't sometimes even recognize pain. So again, if you don't even feel pain, then how can you take certain caution? So again, we're not saying don't get it done. I don't want our medical team.
No, and I absolutely concur. I mean, my father had a horrible, he had horrible hip pain because he was a collegiate athlete. He was a runner, longest runs. He had to have his hip surgery, but yes, the anesthesia did exacerbate his confusion, and it was challenging. And since I'm speaking to your point about anger and frustration, yelling back, arguing, trying to rationalize, none of that works. Empathy. I understand. You sound really, really frustrated. I'm so sorry. This must be very hard for you, and being very empathetic to your point. I mean, that, because, my dad was a big guy, and in spite of his advanced Parkinson's, he still had incredible strength in his hands and his arms. And if he got really mad, he was not a violent man at all, but if he didn't feel heard, he would grab your arm, and we were like, oh my God,
Yeah.
you know, so we would compare sometimes the finger marks because he would, you know, want to be heard.
Yes.
So, yeah.
I just want to mention our Pat Richardson with NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness,
Yes.
and exactly what you're talking about, that empathy. We have for you, or I have for you, a recommendation that we use in all of our support classes, and that is getting acquainted with Dr. Javier Amador, A-M-A-D-O-R. He has a program called LEAP, and it stands for Listen, Empathize, Agree, and Partner. And his books, I Am Not Sick, I Don't Need Help, and Learn to Leap, have been life-changing for our members. So it addresses that strategy, exactly what you are talking about. Because we see similar symptoms in folks with mental health conditions and with dementia. They're separate medical conditions, but some of the symptoms are very much the same. And so I highly recommend Dr. Amador's work. He has a LEAP Institute. And I would at some point love to bring him to Prince William County to do one of his presentations. I was privileged a couple years ago to attend one of his presentations up in Bethesda, and it's just life-changing. Really makes a difference. So LEAP, L-E-A-P, and Dr. Amador.
What was the P for? What was the P?
Partner.
What is that? The P?
Partner.
Wow, thank you. Pat, that might be a cool thing to do in conjunction with the agent.
No, that's okay.
Steal your thunder, but that's
Don't worry
the
about
kind,
that.
those are the kinds of ideas that we're looking for, and I think that would be totally incredible.
So,
I got one for you, Deb, so I'll see you.
so yeah,
Yeah,
well,
just email me, yeah.
I have something to say, closing on why this is a topic for us, but my question really is, we talked a little bit about post, so things after the fact. You know, what are some of the symptoms, the early signs that we could look for to at least be on the lookout for? Because again, it's cognitive, so usually it starts in the mental before it plays out in the physical, but what is it that we can, or even for oneself, what is something that would be important for us to know?
So, obviously, there are certain things that come natural with aging, right? We start to slow down, we have, what was that song again? You know, we all have that as we age. What's important to note is that there are certain things that often get attributed to aging that are not common aging symptoms. So what we find in those early cognitive impairment stages, repetition. That is one of the biggest signs that we see where, if you notice, maybe you're talking to your loved one and you notice that they keep seeming to repeat. And at first maybe you're like, you just told me that. And often they try to play it off. Oh, well, you didn't seem like you were listening. You know, because they're still somewhat cognitive. That is not a sign of normal aging. So that would be something that is kind of like, take note of that. Repeat, not just repeating themselves, but repeat questions. Noticing that they seem just a little bit disoriented. Often these are counted as, oh, they're just getting older. But what I encourage, I'm sure Retta would say the same thing, take them to get checked immediately. If you see these things, most people who have Medicare, most seniors who have Medicare, there is supposed to be an annual well check that actually tests for cognitive. Now, Fairfax Family Practice does very well with this. Many practices do not. So I would encourage, even if you don't see symptoms, just get that cognitive testing done so that you can you'll have something to compare it to each year to see if they're starting to get a little slower.
Like you notice, things are not in the place where they should be, especially if mom and dad live on their own, and you go to the house, you start noticing things are not in place. Their glasses are in the microwave. They're not. You find strange things under the bed, in their drawers hidden. and they'll go around saying, I can't find it, or someone stole my money. That's the famous one. Someone stole my money, or they can't trust someone, a loved one that they no longer trust. Another sign, one of my sisters at church said to me, Miss Rhoda, I have a problem, my dad will not leave. And it got to the point she had to have windows open in the house because the smell was just too much. And I said, well, then maybe you should take him to the doctor and sit down, because a lot of times they share more with the doctor than they will share with their loved ones. And he learned that he didn't feel comfortable with his daughter bathing him. And there's a thing called the blue hug gown that you can wear and zip up, and they can still bathe in that. But you have to get to the core of the problem, and a lot of times they will not share with the person they see every single day. There are situations, but there's a list online that will give you a breakdown of a lot of the signs that you really should take. But when you see things not in place, like eyeglasses in the microwave, or you find a doll in the refrigerator or in the freezer, those are signs that you need to talk to mom and dad. Or they disheveled when you pick them up. They're not the way they normally are. I just took a tour of a client, and the mom had taught for over 40 years. And as we're pouring through the community, she started talking about the children, and you know, they need to listen, and English is the best way you do it, get them to read books. She didn't even realize where we were.
Can I add two things to that?
No, you go right ahead.
I was just gonna say, isolation is another one. So they always go to church, but then there's a reason why, like, well, I don't like those ladies anymore. Well, that's not true. Like, digging deeper on the isolation of why they all of a sudden don't go to the tennis group or the things that they used to do, because it can be a one-off that change, like the snowstorm, and then that sets the tone for them just not getting back into a former habit. So asking more questions.
Isolation rates really high during COVID.
Yeah.
But digging deeper as to like why they continue to isolate, because I think an individual without cognitive change can get back into those things, but as soon as the pattern shifts one time, for somebody with cognitive change, have a hard time getting back into what was previously a long set pattern. And then the other thing I wanted to say, I'm with Westminster, we're a nonprofit life plan community. We have a virtual series that I'll send to you, 6 different sessions, and it answers a lot of the questions we've asked. Brain health breakthroughs, that's next month with some neurologists. Normal aging versus cognitive change. So they're all virtual, and I can send them to you as well, Rhoda. So anybody's welcome to attend. They're all virtual, so there's no limit on how many seats you can have.
I'm going to let, yes, go ahead, Ms. Emily, I'm gonna let her finish up and then we'll close it out.
As an audiologist, the question of asking people to be acting like they're not hearing things, I mean, one of the things that PCP should be saying is get your hearing tested. Because the number one modifiable risk factor for dementia is hearing loss. And I do wanna say that at least at our clinic and at many audiology clinics now, when you wanna find out if you're doing cognitive screening, the cognitive screening takes 5 minutes, and it's a good indicator of mild cognitive impairment. And then the studies show that if, for instance, it's hearing loss, we're showing decreased numbers, hearing aids can bring those numbers back up. So, the Lancet, I have a copy of the diagram. It does talk about those modifiable risk factors. The new one in 2024 does say it's hearing loss and cholesterol level that are the number 1 and number 2 modifiable risk factors. So, when you talk about a tsunami of dementia, I think that these kinds of studies on how to take the steps, I think, and I'm not saying that people are flooding my office for cognitive screening, but I think they should be. I think that family members should be seeing these indicators and saying, let's go get your hearing tested. Or the PCP should be saying, go to this office, get your hearing tested, get a screening, and get a baseline. But I wonder if people are just, they're scared. Like, if you have diabetes, if you have an indication that you might be diabetic, you're not gonna go to your doctor, you're gonna just wait and see. There's these fears that somehow we have to convince people to overcome. So it doesn't lead to a tsunami, which is a little intimidating.
And if I just add to that, I love that. That's one of the things our program, Dementia Caregivers, is doing. As I mentioned, we're working with Fairfax Family Practice to get the signage actually in there. We're also, working with other local businesses. We've created approved signage that just simply says, have you felt this way? Has your loved one said this? Maybe they might need a cognitive testing type thing. So we're, and with the hearing, that spot on, so we're trying to do what we can to help make those connections, so that we can just cut down what we're seeing with dementia.
Again, so for the sake of time, first of all, I want to make sure we at least gave our speakers here a round of applause. Just real fast, because I want to first of all, make sure everybody that was here at least got a chance to sign in, right? So I want to make sure